So once again, assalamu alaikum to all of you. And this is lecture number 32, and it's about Matthew Arnold's life, works, and about his age. Remember, I will also send you, inshallah, today the images of the handouts which you have to study regarding this essay. So there are approximately 7 pages which I will send you, inshallah, maybe after all these sessions. Okay. Okay, Matthew Arnold's life. Who was Matthew Arnold? Let's first of all let me tell you about him. Do you have any idea about Matthew Arnold? Do you know? Have you ever heard Matthew Arnold's name in poetry? Have you ever heard his name in poetry? Yes. Sometimes it seems as if you just join the session and then you just leave. ऐसा मैं feel होता
Sir,
है
we
कि
may have listened his name, but right now it's not coming in brain.
कहाँ कहाँ सुना था आप लोगों ने, मतलब किस सब्जेक्ट के में या कोर्स में आपने इनका नाम सुना था? इन विच कोर्स? कैन यू टेल मी सो दैट आई कैन करेक्ट यू?
सर ऐसे याद नहीं आ रहा, पर शायद पोइट्री हिस्ट्री जो
Okay.
हिस्ट्री खोल के
So, so let me tell you, Matthew Arnold. Okay, one more thing. Let me tell you about your attendance and about participation. As I told you, and many times I have told you that those who attend classes, that counts positive, and your participation and your timely submission of assignments and giving presentation, all these are positive aspects and these things count, and you'll be given marks for these things. So many students take do not take seriously, and some students take such things seriously. So those who take seriously, they will gain the fruit of it, and those who do not take seriously, so they will be deprived of these benefits. So still you have approximately 6 to 7 to 8 class, 3 weeks you can say that. Still you have this, including this one, because in the meeting I've heard that your exams will start after 9th of next month, in the second week you can say. So before we may have our last session on third or fourth, and then you will be given, you will have approximately 1 week time or 5 days time, and then your exams will commence. So this is something that was delivered to us in the last meeting, and it is to a great extent confirmed as well. ठीक है, तो यह एक हफ्ता हो जाएगा, एक हफ्ता नेक्स्ट वाला हो जाएगा, और उसके बाद वाला जो होगा वो लास्ट वीक होगा हर हाल में। ठीक है, हमें कहा गया कि आप 9 से पहले पहले अपना जो सिलेबस है उसे कंप्लीट करना है आपने। तो 3 या 4 तारीख को हमारी क्लास, आज हम क्या तारीख है, व्हाट डेट इज़ टुडे? टुडे इज़
19th.
19 sir.
19th, देन 19th के बाद वी विल मीट ऑन 26, एंड देन 26 के बाद आई थिंक सेकंड और थर्ड को वी हैव अ लास्ट सेशन, राइट? तो जो प्रेजेंटेशन नहीं देगा, अभी भी अप्रोक्सीमेटली 20 स्टूडेंट्स आर स्टिल लेफ्ट, दे हैव टू गिव देयर presentation, 20, or I think 17 15 or 16 students, or maybe 17 are still left. So those who do not have not given their presentation, first thing is that it is a negative thing for them. Secondly, if they do not give their presentation, so they will lose their marks. So जो 15 नंबर की presentation है वो तो उनके गए, और नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट भी जाएगा। तो ये चीज़ ध्यान में रखिए कि प्रेजेंटेशन देने से आपका ही फ़ायदा हो जाएगा। एक तो आपका अच्छा इमेज जो आप ख़राब कर चुके हैं, लेकिन ज़्यादा ख़राब नहीं होगा। सेकेंडली आपको 15 में से कुछ आपको मार्क्स मिलेंगे, वरना वो आपके मार्क्स बिल्कुल ख़त्म हो जाएंगे। योर पेपर विल बी असेस्ड आउट ऑफ 85। लेटर ऑन nobody will get your presentation, right? ऐसा नहीं होगा आप एग्जाम के बाद में सर हमारी प्रेजेंटेशन ले लें, ये ले लें, वो ले लें। Nothing will be done like this. Strictly for we have been asked to be strict in this regard, and we have also been asked to be strict regarding attendance. तो ये एक attendance का तो फिर नए सेशन में इंशाल्लाह एक नया तरीक़ाकार होगा, but right now there is nothing like this. But presentation के हवाले से there are some uh, few things which I have mentioned, and about your exams. So after 9th of December, you your exams will commence. So from 9th of December, your exams will commence, and this is the second last week. इसके बाद जो ये next week होगा, you we have 3 weeks, including this week. आज के दिन को मिला के तीन हमारे पास हैं, दो और होंगे, तीन है इसके साथ. So approximately we have 9 classes, including today's class. Okay, so let's start. Matthew Arnold actually was born in Laleham in the valley of the Thames on December 24, 1822. So he was a Victorian poet and novelist. Who was he? He was a Victorian poet and critic. Let me write it. Matthew Arnold was
Matthew Arnold.
Matthew Arnold was a Victorian poet and a critic. Remember, he is one of the writers of one of the English writers who was equally known for his poetry and criticism both. You must have heard many the names of many poets and the names of many critics. So either they were poets, or they were critics. Like Wordsworth was a poet, Coleridge was a poet. Basically, they were poets. John Milton was basically a poet, but they also wrote little criticism. So they are known by the name or by their title of being poet. But Matthew Arnold is one of such writers who is equally known for his poetry and criticism both. So not only was he a literary critic, but he was also a social critic. बहुत से होते हैं जिसे लिटरेचर के हद तक महदूद होते हैं, but he was also a social critic. So he was also an educationalist. Remember, he was also an educationalist. So these are the few things which you should remember. ये वो चीज़ें जो आपको जहन नशीन करनी मतलब जहन में रखना होगा. So he was a Victorian poet and novelist, Victorian poet and critic both. He was the son of Dr. Thomas Arnold, the famous headmaster of rugby. Let me clarify it. So, a Victorian poet and critic. Is this clear? So, he was a Victorian poet and a critic, and he was uh, there is a one of 10 children, and he was the second among them. There were 10 siblings, and he was the second among them. His father's name was Dr. Thompson Arnold, and he was a famous headmaster of rugby, with whom many students of literature are familiar and after reading Tom Brown's School Days. Matthew Arnold spent much of his early childhood at Laleham until his father took up his appointment at rugby. When his father, got up appointment at rugby, before this he spent his time at Laleham. During 2 years after this move, Matthew Arnold returned to the district of his birth in order to begin his formal education under the uncle with whom his father had once worked. So, uncle. During this time, there was developing in him that love of the Thames Valley. ये एक valley है, River Thames, you know very well, which he never lost. So he had great love for that valley. Remember, his father had a hand in his early education. Since he was himself an educational, so he educationalist, वह खुद educationalist थे, so he paid a great attention to his son as well. At the age of 13, Matthew Arnold was sent to Winchester, his father's old school, where he stayed only for 1 year. जहाँ पे वो एक साल रुका. His father and he stayed there for 1 year. In August 1837, he was transferred to Rugby, where he remained until 1841. 4 साल तक. So as a boy, Matthew Arnold did not show much earnestness. His flippancy worried his parents. In the beginning, remember, he was not an extraordinary child, and he was normal or average. His father tried to restrain his lively sallies. He developed a passion for fishing which lasted long. In the autumn of 1841, 1841 में Matthew Arnold entered college. He entered Balliol College, Oxford, as a classical scholar. Classical, जिससे पता चला कि Matthew Arnold was also a classical scholar. In that college, he distinguished himself by winning prizes in poetry and by general excellence in the classics. Over there were a lot of competitions in which he used to participate, and he distinguished himself by winning prizes in poetry. He also found time to wander in the Cumber Hills in the company of some of his friends. During the vacations, he walked, boated, and skated in the Lake District. And over there he saw a good deal of Wordsworth. वहाँ पे उसे Wordsworth भी मिले. Remember, it was a time when Wordsworth was, you know, doing his work, and he was definitely alive. For Oxford, Arnold retained an impatient affection. For Oxford University, Arnold had a great affection. Arnold says that Oxford might be a part of the dead or dying world. It might be the home of lost causes and impossible loyalties, and yet steep in sentiment. At Oxford, Matthew Arnold was quite a social line and a cause of worry to his austere friends who felt somewhat disturbed by his boisterous manners and his affectations. ऑक्सफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी में आर्नल्ड का अच्छा वक्त गुजरा था. हिज फ्रेंड्स अप्रिशिएटेड हिज चेयरफुलनेस. उसके दोस्त उससे चेयरफुलनेस को अप्रिशिएट करते थे एंड काइंडलीनेस. बट दे हैड देयर फियर्स. लेकिन वो थोड़ा सा सहमे भी हुए भी रहते थे. क्या कहते थे वो? आवर फ्रेंड्स मैट wrote of one of them utters as many absurdities as ever with as grave a face, and I am afraid waste his time considerably. तो ये एक कोटेशन थी जो कि इंशाल्लाह आपको मिल जाएगी. यू विल गेट द इमेज ऑफ व्हाट आई एम जस्ट टेलिंग यू. Then you will find that he had also foreign trips. He had also foreign trips. He redeemed the disaster of his second class. From Oxford University, he got a degree in second class, and it was something that was very shocking to him. But he redeemed this by securing the Newdigate Prize by passing to Oriel, where he was elected a fellow in 1845. तो बाद में वो आगे गया और फॉरेन ट्रिप्स में गया और वहाँ पे उसको बाकायदा एक प्राइज भी मिला. In the summer of the following year, he made a trip to France and obtained an interview with George Sand, the famous French novelist. In the course of the interview, the two uh, might have talked of the author of Obermann, admired by both of them. Obermann author. So this work, a series of letters treating almost entirely of nature and of the human soul, was valued by Arnold for its profound or great inwardness, its deep sincerity, delicate feeling for nature. Remember, Arnold was a Victorian poet, and Victorian poets were they spoke against romantic movement and romanticism, because romanticism were, according to them, according to T.S. Eliot, romanticism or romantic writers were extremists, and the poets of new classical writers were also extremists. They both were extremists. Why? Because they both were talking about one thing in exaggeratedly. The new classical writers were their poetry was dealing with thoughts, and the poetry or the literature of romanticism was dealing with feelings. So they both were, thoughts and feelings both should be together. But unfortunately, according to T.S. Eliot and even Matthew Arnold, they both were separate with these two edges. So here you will find that Victorian writers, they talk about their age, they talk about the things related to their age. And for Victorian writers and for Victorian poets, poetry is not a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling, but it is a criticism of life. Poetry is a criticism of life, and Matthew Arnold said himself that for poetry, idea is everything. Then we can see that he had a love, or he loved theaters. In London, he saw for the first time the great French tragic actress Elisa Rahil, and he became at once an enthusiastic admirer of her art. Matthew Arnold followed her to Paris, arriving there on December 29, 1846. He attended every one of the 10 or more performances she gave during his stay of slightly over 6 weeks. Matthew Arnold stayed there for 6 weeks, and in these 6 weeks, saw many of her performances. He found time also for French lessons, for dancing, and for visits to other theaters. His love of play going was to remain with him for life, but no other actress was ever to equal that divine Rahil. He was a great admirer of that actress. So he loved theater. And then in 1847, Arnold was appointed private secretary to Lord Lansdowne, the influential Whig statesman. ये Whig party था, उसका statesman था. So this appointment caused anxiety to his brother Tom, who felt that it might accentuate Matthew's worldliness. इससे क्या हुआ, उसके भाई को थोड़ा सा मायूसी हुई, क्यों कि उसके सोचने लगा कि अब हमारा भाई शहर में आ गया और अब वो हो सकता है कि हम लोगों को भूल जाए, और इस तरह की मतलब उसकी फीलिंग. एज आई टोल्ड यू दैट ही हैड, दे वर 10 सिबलिंग्स, 10 बहन भाई थे, एक दो तीन नहीं थे. सो दे हैड अ वेरी गुड गैदरिंग. But Matthew Arnold had no had now to live in the city, and there he mixed freely with wealthy and high sophisticated people. After this lecture, you will learn one more thing, that Victorian public or Victorian period was full of, you know, different activities. It was a time when people were migrating from cities to village, from villages to cities. It was a time when middle class was rising rapidly and lower class was going down day by day. It was a time when new things were happening. It was a time when there were, questions, lots of questions in religious domain, political domain, and industrial revolution was there, and many other things were happening. So his brother thought that now he would leave them and he would not have time for them, but there was nothing like this. Literary enthusiasm and love affair with a lady Margaret, and then we can find that there was one lady with whom we can see that he had some attachment. This is a lady with whom we can see that he had some attachment. Arnold's first volume, The Strayed Traveller and Other Poems, was published. The first volume was published at the beginning of 1849. Its content surprised his sister Mary. उसकी बहन जो थी ने जब उसका content देखा उस वॉल्यूम का, तो उससे काफ़ी सरप्राइज हुई. क्यों सरप्राइज? Why was she surprised? So there is a writer, Berenger. He expressed and so that Matthew Arnold found extremely certain moods according to Matthew Arnold were extremely extreme to his taste. George Sand appealed to him because of her cry of agony and revolt. Matthew Arnold's interest in modern literature was not confined to French works. He acknowledged Wordsworth's healing power. Wordsworth's healing power को acknowledge करता था, and Wordsworth's ability to bring men back into contact with natural things. These things he acknowledged. So while his admiration for Byron had slightly diminished or slightly decreased since his student days, he was still deeply stirred by the passionate and titanic defiance of eternal law uttered by that poet, Goethe. He recognized as the greatest of the moderns in his wise, profound, and comprehensive criticism of life. Okay, when the first volume was published, so its content surprised his sister Mary, जिसको अभी मैंने बताया. She attributed her surprise to the moral consciousness manifest in the poems, something which such a man as Clough has. So those who read this volume or they read this volume carefully must have found it in excellent preparation for Arnold's second volume. फिर उसका second volume भी appear हुआ, and it appeared in the autumn of 1852, 1852 में second volume उसका जो है वो सामने आया. During his continental holiday in 1846 and 47, Arnold seems to have met a girl with blue eyes. Her identity is unknown. We don't know about her identity, we don't know who she was, and there is not much detail about her identity. So her identity is unknown because, but in his volume of poems published in 1849, he gave her the name Margaret or Marguerite. There seems to have been a love affair, but the actual facts are not known. ये कहा जाता है कि उनका आपस में कोई अफेयर था, but we don't know about actual facts. Even the identity of the girl remains a mystery. अब तक उस लड़की के बारे में भी ज़्यादा मालूम नहीं, लेकिन जो कुछ मालूम है वो आपको बता देता हूँ. One of the biographers of Matthew Arnold believes that she was a governess, a lady companion, or a teacher. Governess थी या lady companion थी या teacher थी. While कुछ और बायोग्राफर्स का कहना है कि it appears that Margaret she had blue eyes, soft ash colored hair, a pale complexion, rounded cheek, and a mouth which readily assumed an arch and mocking smile. She used to wear a kerchief tied around her head, जिसे हम स्कार्फ टाइप का कहते हैं, and she would move with grace and spoke in a clear musical voice, and she was French. और वो कौन थी? फ्रेंच थी. तो ये उनके साथ उनका एक अफेयर था, अगरचे शादी नहीं हुई. Arnold speaks of a sea which, so but there was he did not marry her, or there was no marriage between them. कुछ ऑब्स्टिकल्स है तो ज़ाहिर है वो हमारे लिए इतनी अहमियत के हामिल नहीं है. हमें सिर्फ ये मालूम करना है कि पढ़ना था कि उसकी लाइफ में कोई औरत आई थी तो उसके साथ आया शादी की, या वो क्या मामले होता है. लेटर ऑन वी फाइंड that Matthew Arnold fell in love with Miss Whiteman, daughter of the judge, सर विलियम वाइटमैन. सर विलियम वाइटमैन की बेटी से उसकी शादी वो उससे he fell in love with her, but Sir William Whiteman refused his consent to the marriage. Why? Because Arnold's income as a private secretary to Lord Lansdowne was not large, and while the Oriel Fellowship was his only as long as he remained single. तो वो जो उसको तनख्वाह मिलती थी वो इतनी ज़्यादा नहीं थी कि उस जज फील करता था कि he would not be able to manage things with my daughter, his daughter. Arnold now began to look for a more stable and remunerative job, one that might enable him to renew his courtship. फिर उसने दूसरी जॉब शुरू कर दी ढूंढना. So by a favor shown to him by Lord Lansdowne, Arnold was appointed an inspector of a school. और उसके बाद जो है by a favor, again by a favor shown to him by Lord Lansdowne, Arnold was appointed an inspector of schools on April 1855. और ये वो पोस्ट है जो उसने अपने आखिरी वक्त तक अपने करता रहा इस पे काम. Just after 1 year of retirement, he died, and he served for 35 years as a school inspector, visiting different countries, continents, in order to bring improvement in the educational system of his country. Then marriage took place in June 1851 and the honeymoon was spent in France, Switzerland and Italy. It was a happy married life. Matthew Arnold and his wife had 6 children. उनके 6 बच्चे हुए जिनमें 4 लड़के और 2 लड़कियां हुई and of the 3 boys one died in infancy. उन लड़कों में एक का इंतकाल बचपन में हो गया था इन्फेंसी में and two in their teens और दो जब टीन एज पे पहुंचे तो they died. तो ये these were big shocks for Arnold. Remember, these were big shocks for this critic. Both husband and wife were extremely sociable and had a wide circle of friends. बहुत ज़्यादा sociable थे and they had a wide circle of friends. One of the daughters shared her father's love for of travel, and he almost found her company indispensable on his travels. एक लड़की तो बेटी तो साथ ही अक्सर होती थी. And Matthew Arnold's brother Tom had been mistaken in his judgment in declaring during Matthew Arnold's engagement that Matthew would never be happy as a married man. उसके भाई ने कहा था एक दफा कि Matthew Arnold would never be happy as a married man, but it proved wrong, and he had a very happy life. He was happily married, loved his home, and especially loved children, was free from all bitterness and envy, and notwithstanding his cold manners. He was at heart sincere, generous, and true. तो मैथ्यू आर्नल्ड की जो मैरिज लाइफ थी वो बहुत ज़्यादा खुशगवार थी. तो याद रखिएगा राइटर्स के जो हम स्टडी करते हैं गालिबन आई हैव टोल्ड यू दिस थिंग दैट व्हेन वी स्टडी अ क्रिटिक सो वी स्टडी थ्री थिंग्स. नंबर वन हिज लाइफ, not everything related to his life, but things which play a significant role in the personality of writer. So writer's life, his work, life और इसकी एज. नंबर थ्री इज वर्क. ऐसा नहीं कि हम डायरेक्टली उसका काम जो जैसे हमें इसका भी ऐसे पढ़ना है द स्टडी ऑफ पोएट्री, so we are not supposed to study this essay straight away. No, we have to study first his life, some important characters, things related to his life, then his about his age, and the third thing is that particular work which we have to study. So right now we are talking in this session about his life and about his age, about his life especially and his work, and then inshallah in the next session about his age. In the third session, we will start inshallah the study of poetry. It will take two I think sessions to complete. तो वो दो सेशन में कंप्लीट हो जाएगा इंशाल्लाह. इट्स नॉट अ वेरी लॉन्ग वन. So we have understood that Matthew Arnold's married life was very happy one, and he had 6 children. But of course, 3 children died. 2 died in teenage, and 1 died in infancy. So these things were, shocking to him. But they both were very sociable. Matthew Arnold worked as an inspector of a school for 35 years. Remember, 35 years. And during this period, he also worked as a professor of poetry. He also worked as a professor of poetry. Arnold was appointed an inspector of a school in 1851. He spent 35 uh, years traveling about the country, examining teachers and correcting endless examination papers. He made numerous reports on English and foreign schools, and he went 3 times abroad to study educational methods on his continent. So he had a very busy, often a laborious life, very busy and laborious life. And therefore we can understand his statement that उसने एक दफा कहा था all his literary work was done late at night. उसने एक दफा कहा था कि all my literary work was done, or I did my all literary work at night after a day of tedious toil. So रात में वो काम करता था. He performed his official duties cheerfully and patiently, and after a day's work he hurried away to the Elysian fields of literature because he loved literature. Arnold disliked the routine of inspecting schools and examining papers, but he never doubted the importance of his educational work. He was himself the son of a great schoolmaster, so he saw clearly that it was upon the teachers in the state-aided primary school that the task would descend of cultivating or civilizing the next generation. Arnold did a great service to the cause of education as well by his work as an inspector of a school, and he also worked as a professor of poetry. In 1857, he was elected professor of poetry at Oxford, in which कैपेसिटी वर्क फॉर 10 years और तकरीबन 10 साल तक इस पे काम कर एज अ प्रोफेसर ये काम करता रहा. He seems much better placed in 10 years of his professorship of poetry at Oxford than in his 35 years inspector of schools. The post of professor of poetry involved only light duties. ज़्यादा duties नहीं थी, light duties थी. Such he had to deliver 3 lectures each year. ऐसी ड्यूटी थी कि उसे एक साल में सिर्फ और सिर्फ 3 लेक्चर्स डिलीवर करने होते थे. Mainly, he had to deliver 3 lectures each year. He was the first layman to occupy the chair and the first professor to speak in English instead of Latin. So he was the first person who spoke in English instead of Latin. As a lecturer, he was not outstanding, though he achieved some successes. So we can see that Arnold, there are a few things that which you can also read Arnold as a poet. So poetry is a criticism of life. Arnold ने कहा है poetry के बारे में कि poetry is a criticism of life. Arnold also was a great classics, and he also had some you can say uh, uh, interest in romanticism as well. He liked Wordsworth, and he also met Wordsworth. So you'll also find Arnold elegiac poetry, and his attitude towards nature was also something that is appreciating. Arnold's prose works. If we talk about Arnold's prose works, we can see literary. Arnold was not only a poet, but he was also a critic. In criticism, we can find that he was a literary critic as well as a social critic. In literary criticism, you can find translation Homer. इसका ये काम है on translating Homer is last words on translating Homer on the study of Celtic literature and the essays in criticism. तो अभी जो हम essay पढ़ रहे हैं the study of poetry, this is something that we can find in this last one, the essays in criticism. इसमें ये आपको मिलेगा. He was a social and political criticism. You can find also social and political criticism in Arnold's work. Culture and Anarchy is a very good example of Arnold's social criticism, in which you can also find some political aspects, which is a very good which shows a very good picture of Victorian era. And then you can also find his different other types of work like mixed essays, Irish essays, and other essays and discourses in America. Important works in prose. We can see that Popular Education in France, 1861. It was published on translating Homer, 1861. Last Words on translating Homer, 1862. Essays in Criticism was published in 1865. Culture and Anarchy was published in 1869, and Last Essays on Church and Religion, 1877. So these are some of his important works in prose. So if you have any question regarding this, you can ask me.
Sir, as you told that Matthew Arnold was himself from Victorian poet, and Victorian poet wrote against Romanticism. And in last, as poet, we have seen Matthew
Yes.
Arnold. So there we have Romanticism of Matthew Arnold. So
Yeah.
what does it mean?
Romanticism is he also had feelings for nature. Remember, they did not totally rejected romantic poetry. They also loved some aspect of romantic poetry, but as romantic writers were only talking about nature, feelings, sensations, imagination. So this is something that they dislike. So they were not against them. They uh, Matthew Arnold has referred to Wordsworth in his, this essay which we are going to study, the study of poetry. So there were few things which they dislike. Remember, Victorian poets says that poetry is a criticism of life. Poetry is not a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. With new classical writers, things were different. With romantic writers, things were opposite. With Victorian, they tried to mix both things together. उन्होंने फीलिंग्स और थॉट्स दोनों को एक ही जगह करने की अपनी एक कोशिश की है. समझ आए? तो with romantic writers there was only feelings. With new classical writers there was only thought. But Victorian tried to put both these things together. तो कुछ चीज़ें उनकी वो जो थी वो उन्हें पसंद नहीं थी. ओवरऑल हम नहीं कहेंगे.
Okay, sir, got it. Thank you.
Yes, any other? After this, we have a session in which we will talk about the characteristics of Victorian era.
Sir, here we have discussed three ladies. That first in the love of theatre, the heading. Elisa Rahel, as you told, he used to watch his old theatres.
Yeah, he loved that actresses, and due to since he loved that actresses, so what happened? Loved means that as an actress, as an actress, he would love her, and that is why he would watch her performances. He stayed there for 6 weeks, and he almost he saw many of his performances, which were being performed or given on the stage. So he loved her performance and as an actress. Second lady was the lady who he had affair with, and he wanted he wanted to marry her, but nothing happened. There were certain hurdles in the way. Anyhow, he could not marry her. But the third lady was the lady who was the lady of the judge, and first when he sent proposal, so um, her father refused to accept it. Why? Because his salary was low according to him. And then he found another job, and that job enabled him to get to marry her. So that was a happy marriage, and they had 6 children. 3 died and 3 were alive. And of course, they both were sociable, and they both had a very good time.
Sir, the Margaret, in his two volumes, The Blue Eye Girl, that was
Yes.
Margaret he written about.
Yes, she was French. She was French, and he also definitely mentioned her in his poems. Normally, writers and poets, they mention things regarding their beloveds and regarding their those women or even men, or people who they love. जो है जॉन मिल्टन ने अपने भांजे का जिक्र किया था अपने एक एलिजी में, जिसका इंतकाल हो गया था. तो he mentioned the name of, or he associated or dedicated one poem to his nephew who died, and he had a very good relationship with his sister, and he liked his nephew. So this is something that happens.
Thank you, sir.
Any other question? So now after few minutes, I will start the second session, and that will be about Victorian uh, chief characteristics of Victorian era. Definitely, will not cover each and everything, but the important things which we should know, will cover, inshallah. So see you after almost 5 minutes.